北方連合所属巡洋艦のクロンシュタット。
Is the new Northern Parliament ship Kronshtadt underwhelming? This is apparently the question that some folks have about the latest ultra-rare ship to enter the fray in Azur lane. Yeah, so the Abyssal Refrain event has arrived, and with it comes the first new Russian ultra-rare ship, the large cruiser Kronshtadt, or Kronk as the Azur lane community has come to fondly call her. By the way, what is it about Russian events and the surprisingly good lore? There's just something about Northern Parliament events that really drive Azur lane's narrative forward. Anyway, let's get back to Kronshtadt. Since the release of new heavy-hitting UR ships such as New Jersey and Shimakaze, expectations for these new UR releases have been sky high. And by that I mean in terms of just how broken, just how strong, these UR ships are expected to be. The release of Ulrich von Hutten, however, brought about the first wave of concerns, pun so totally intended, about potentially underwhelming UR releases. Basically, since New Jersey and Shimakaze set such a high bar, anything less is considered to be disappointing to some folks. Now personally, I thought the initial complaints about Ulrich were a bit overblown. I mean, being the second best ship after New Jersey is not exactly a bad place to be. At least she's second best as of right now based on my experience, since my max level, max oath Ulrich typically outperforms my max level, max oath Dev 30 FDG, at least from the off-flagship position. And so until FDG finally gets her fate simulation, which could very well place her at the top once again, depending on what the devs decide, my personal battleship rankings are New Jersey, followed by UVH or Ulrich, and then FDG, just based on overall performance and utility, at least for now. It's also a great lesson about holding judgment until ships get fully leveled and tested out by the community, as I'd say that Ulrich turned out to be better than initially thought, at least based on the opinions when she first came out. By the way, if you haven't checked it out yet, feel free to watch my initial preview video for Ulrich von Hutten, who I like even more now after getting her maxed out and testing her in higher level stages. Which now brings us to Kronshtadt. Like Ulrich before her, some of the initial reactions to Kronshtadt have been, well, not exactly effusive. Especially when compared to the top heavy cruiser, or large cruiser to be more accurate, which as of right now would be Agir. And I've seen this reaction not just in some of the comments posted in the Western community, but in the Japanese community as well. So is Kronshtadt the weakest new ultra-rare to be released so far? Well, let's take a closer look. Now with base stats, it's always important to keep in mind that these don't give the whole picture, as they don't take skills into account. Nevertheless, they serve as a good starting point for analyzing ships. For extra context, I am also including how Kronshtadt ranks among heavy cruisers for her stats, and also how she compares to the top ship for each stat. Now the good news is that Kronshtadt does really well in two stats that are especially important for heavy cruisers, which would be health and firepower. Kronshtadt, for example, has the third highest HP pool among heavy cruisers behind only Agir and Azuma. By the way, remember those two names, because you'll be hearing them a lot in this video, since they're the two premier large cruisers in the game, and will be the two ships that Kronshtadt will be compared to the most. Anyway, high HP is important for large cruisers since they often serve as the tanks for your vanguard. Kronshtadt also does really well for firepower, ranking 6th among all heavy cruisers. Now in case you go, huh? Only 6th for a UR? Just keep in mind that Agir, who is considered the best ship among all the heavy cruisers, is actually tied for 11th in this stat. But while her firepower is lower than Azuma and Kronshtadt, her main gun efficiency is higher than both of them overall, which is one reason why I said earlier that the base stats alone don't give the whole picture. By the way, just in case you're wondering who the top heavy cruisers are for firepower, they are Prince Heinrich, Azuma, Deutschland, Prince Adalbert, and Admiral Grafspee. Also note that Kronshtadt gets a permanent 8% boost to her firepower by virtue of her red skill. She also gets an 8% boost to her evasion stat, which certainly can't hurt because she has the lowest base evasion among all heavy cruisers, at just 39 points, which is dead last. Yeah, you're not going to want to pick Kronshtadt for your school dodgeball team. Yeah, she's going to get hit. A lot. Maybe stick a golden washing machine on her or something, which I'll actually talk about more later. In the meantime, reload is middle of the pack, which is aight, I guess, as the young cool kids say these days. Accuracy is also below average, so the Fumo 25 Aux from the core shop might be worth using as well since it gives a firepower boost, in addition to an accuracy boost. Of course, one question a lot of people have is how she compares to the other two large cruisers, mainly Azuma and Agir. So to demonstrate that, here is a graph that compares the three. Now, for the most part, Kronштadt's stats are within striking distance of Azuma and Agir. Her efficiencies, for example, are second best overall among the three when equipping a Northern Parliament gun. Accuracy and evasion is the lowest of the three, but that's also mitigated somewhat by her higher luck stat, which improves a ship's chance of hitting enemies and evading their attacks, as well as landing critical hits. In the case of Kronshtadt, she has 50 luck, while Agir and Azuma start out with 0 luck by virtue of being PR research ships. Azuma though already has a fate simulation, so she can at least raise her luck to I think about 25. There's also that 8% evasion stat boost that I mentioned earlier, which isn't necessarily much, but still a good thing to have. Also, while Kronshtadt looks to have the lowest HP, it doesn't factor in what I guess would be Liam Neeson's all-time favorite thing in the whole wide world, her particular set of skills. And so once you factor those in, her positioning among the 3 prime large cruisers actually changes. For example, here is the tanking score provided by someone in the Japanese community for Kronshtadt and other tanky ships in the game once you factor in HP, evasion, and skills combined with the high-performance hydraulic steering gear or the golden washing machine, as well as the beaver tag. As you can see, while Kronshtadt is behind Agir in Anchorage, she also ends up surpassing Azuma from a tanking perspective and excels quite well in terms of survivability. Like Azuma and Agir, she also gains an extra main gun, although she doesn't get hers until her second limit break. And then like Agir, she also gets an extra ghost gun, but she gets hers after her first limit break, while Agir gets hers after her second limit break. It also looks like Kronstadt's ghost gun fires AP shells, which can pierce through multiple foes, while Agir's uses HE shells, which are I guess kind of like Disco Inferno, because they burn baby burn. The difference kind of reflects Kronstadt's role as more of a mobber, which she especially excels at, while Agir is better at bossing. By the way, Azuma, in case you're wondering, does not get a ghost gun. Kronshtadt is also more gunning focused and equips a light cruiser gun for her secondary weapon, while Agir uses torpedoes, the latter once again being more suitable for bossing. Azuma on the other hand uses a DD gun as her secondary weapon. Kronstadt's specialty as a mob fleet heavy cruiser is further reinforced by her yellow skill, which is called strong-willed support. In addition to boosting survivability by increasing her burn damage reduction and providing what amounts to a 10% heal at low health, the skill also lets her fire a cross-fleet barrage 20 seconds after the other fleet that she's not in starts a battle. This cross-fleet barrage will slow enemies that the other fleet is facing by 40%. This is in contrast to Agir's 60% slow, which is applied within Agir's own fleet sortie when her torpedoes hit a foe. In addition to applying a cross-fleet slow, Kronstadt's yellow skill also reduces the main gun spread of all battleships in the other fleet if the flagship is also a battleship. So this is great for improving the accuracy of shelling battleships in the other fleet. Her red skill, Indomitable Ice, meanwhile, gives her an 8% boost to her firepower and evasion stats like I mentioned earlier. Also, if she equips a high caliber gun like the Type 0 Azuma gun, the 300mm SKC-39 Agir gun, or better yet, her new Russian B-50 gun, she can cut the time or number of shots to proc her red skill barrage in half from 8 shots to just 4 shots, like Azuma and Agir's skills. Her blue skill, called Tempered Prudence, reduces the damage she takes from AP shells by 8%, and also lets her fire a barrage after every 4 shots that debuffs the firepower of enemies by 5%. Equip a Russian gun and the skill reduces damage from all types of shots by 8%, while also increasing the efficiency of her secondary gun by a whopping 45% when the skill is maxed out. All in all, this puts a clear difference in how she plays versus Azuma and Agir, and also shows how the design philosophy for Azur Lane has changed over the years. For example, the oldest ship of the 3, Azuma, has a kit that primarily focuses on buffing herself and her own performance. Agir, on the other hand, throws in enemy debuffs via slow and an armor break that's especially great against bosses. Kronshtadt meanwhile adds cross-fleet capabilities as well as defensive skills that focus on survivability, making her an ideal anchor for a mob fleet's vanguard. And while Agir essentially power crept Azuma, I like how Kronshtadt, while still a strong ship, doesn't power creep Agir and brings something different to the table instead. Now let's go over recommended gear as well as Kronstadt's synergies with other ships. For her main gun, I recommend getting her Russian triple 305mm B-50 that you can acquire from the Abyssal Refrain event shop for 2,000 points. Not only does this fulfill the requirements to fully utilize her red skill, and is arguably the best high caliber gun right now for large cruisers, it also fulfills the requirements of her blue skill, allowing you to slot the best secondary gun and the best anti-air gun to suit the situation, since you don't need to use the secondary slot or the third slot. in order to fulfill the blue skills requirements in full. Otherwise, you can use the Agir gun from PR4 Research or the Azuma gun from PR2 Research, but you will need to slot a Northern Parliament gun in either your secondary slot or your anti-air slot in order to fulfill the aforementioned blue skill fully. For newer players, a good poverty option is the purple triple 283mm SKC-28, which you can get from T3 and T4 Ironblood tech boxes. Just note that this is not a Russian gun either. And then for her secondary gun, I recommend the prototype triple 152mm MK25 AP gun, which you can get from the Gear Lab or from PR1 Research. This armor-piercing gun is great for mobbing as well as medium armor enemies. And then for an HE alternative when facing light armor foes, the prototype triple 155mm Kai from the Gear Lab is also good. Now in case you need more AA stats and are willing to sacrifice a little bit of your firepower, the prototype triple 152mm DP Mark 17 from PR2 Research is a good option for plane heavy stages like World 13. And then in case you're using a non-Russian main gun, you can also slot in the triple 152mm B38 Mark V or Chapayev gun. Acquiring this gun, however, is a little bit difficult because it is gated via events such as the old Northern Overture or Korovod of Dawn's Rime events. And then for a poverty option for newer players, the twin 150mm TBTSK C36 or Tabasco gun is a solid option. You can get this gun from T3 and T4 Ironblood tech boxes, while blueprints also drop at maps 4.2, 9.3, and 11.4. For anti-air gun options, I recommend the following depending on the situation. Up first is the sextuple 40mm Bofors from PR3 Research, which you can use if you want max AA in plane heavy maps. An easier to get alternative would be the quadruple 40mm Bofors, which you can acquire from the Gear Lab, PR Research, T4 and T5 Eagle Union tech boxes, as well as a map drop in terms of blueprints for 5-4, 11-3, and 14-1. Another gun to consider is the twin 134mm AA gun from the Gear Lab, which you can use in maps that don't have enemy planes in order to get an extra boost to the equipping ship's firepower stat. So just basically for boosting Kronstadt's firepower even more. Otherwise, there's the twin 113mm AA gun, also known as the Roomba gun, which you can get from the Gear Lab, PR Research, T4 and T5 Royal Navy tech boxes, and as a map drop as far as blueprints from 7.2 and 11.4. It's basically a solid all-around AA gun with long range. And if you still need to equip a Russian gun to fulfill the requirements of your blue skill fully, the twin 100mm AA MZ14 that drops from map C1 of the Abyssal Refrain event is a good option. You can use this, for example, if you're equipping the purple triple 283mm SKC-28 and the purple Tabasco as your secondary weapon. So basically this is good for newer players. The only thing is you're limited to getting it from the event that Kronshtadt is in right now. Now let's go over some AUX equipment recommendations, or auxiliary equipment. So for heavy cruisers, you usually want to use one AUX slot for gear that boosts evasion, and then the other slot for gear that increases either HP and defense, or accuracy and firepower. So for one of those AUX slots, you can consider either the high performance hydraulic steering gear or the Beaver Squad tag. These are two of the best evasion stat boosting AUX gears that you can use on large heavy cruisers. As far as the difference, the gold steering gear gives you a 30% chance to evade all enemy attacks for 2 seconds every 20 seconds. The Beaver tag, on the other hand, increases your entire fleet speed by 20%, and is especially helpful for the Vanguard because it makes them move faster. Blueprints for the gold steering gear are a common PR series research reward and also drop in the Abyssal Refrain event's D3 map. And then the Beaver tag is a collection reward that you can get by going to Memento on the right side of the main menu, and then Collection on the left side of the next menu, and then you just do the Beaver Squad collection exercise. For a poverty option for newer players, you can use the blue hydraulic steering gear or the blue naval camouflage. Now let's go over the options for the other auxiliary slot. One is the VH Armor Special Plating, which gives you a ton of extra health while changing Kronstadt's medium armor into heavy armor for added durability. Just make sure not to use it in stages with lots of enemy torpedo boats or planes, as heavy armor is actually weaker to such attacks than medium armor. This gear is also event limited, so it's not easy to get, at least not at this point. Another gear to consider is the Gold Burn, which is limited gear that you get from the SSSS Gridman collaboration event, which is my favorite collab event so far. Man, that event was just so good. Anyway, Goldburn provides an HP boost as well as extra reload stats. And then if your fleet flagship is a carrier, it will also let you launch a special support barrage 25 seconds after the battle starts. One of the best things about it is that it also changes the battle music, which is especially great for Gridman fans. And then another gear to consider for the second slot is the Fumo 25, which provides a nice boost to firepower and accuracy. The latter is especially helpful for Kronshtadt since her accuracy is below average among all heavy cruisers. You can get the Fumo 25 from the core shop, so it does require you to use your precious core data points. Otherwise, another option is the Repair Toolkit, which is like a purple auxiliary gear. This one provides an HP boost, while also healing 1% of a ship's max HP every 15 seconds, making it good for long battles. It's also very easy to acquire. In fact, you'll be swimming in them after a while. Otherwise, another option is the purple Anti-Torpedo Bulge. This one provides an HP boost while also reducing your torpedo damage by 30%, and by that I mean the torpedo damage that you receive. So basically it's great to use in stages where you face a lot of torpedo ships. Otherwise, another budget option is the purple Fire Control Radar, which is an easier to acquire alternative to the Fumo 25. Now let's go over ships that have good synergy with Kronshtadt. At the top of the list is Changchun Retrofit. This is actually my favorite ship to pair with Kronshtadt because in addition to being a strong ship in her own right, Changchun Retrofit can also boost Kronstadt's firepower and AA by 12%, which is a nice buff. She also fulfills the conditions for Sovetskaya Rossiya's second red skill if you want to use the Russian battleship in your backline. Up next is Avrora. So while Avrora's stats are subpar, her buff to the front line is actually really good. So Avrora can actually buff the damage inflicted by Vanguard ships such as Kronshtadt by a whopping 35%. And then put her in the front line with Changchun Retrofit as well, and then watch Kronstadt's damage take off even further. And then for backline options, one ship to consider is Gangut. So this rowdy, vodka-loving battleship can boost the firepower, torpedo, AA, and reload stats of all Northern Parliament ships by 18% for 10 seconds after firing her main guns. That's another damage increase on top of Changchun and Avrora's buffs. And then you can complete your backline with your ship of choice, or even throw in two of either Rossiya, Belorussia, or Volga for a full Northern Parliament fleet. And then as far as cross-fleet options when running Kronshtadt in the mob fleet, you can stack those in your boss fleet by using either Art Royal, Duke of York, or Agir. Heck, use all of them if you want. The more the merrier, I say. Anyway, there you go, my look at the Russian UR large cruiser Kronshtadt. Since she was just released, a lot of folks still need to do long-term playthroughs of her with everything maxed out. So far though, the consensus is that she's still not as good as Agir overall, but is at least equal to Azuma, which is not bad. That will also be good news for folks who spent months or over a year to get their Agir to Dev 30, since it would be kind of bad if all that hard work was power crept by a ship that you can just randomly pull from an event. As far as being good or slightly better than Azuma, it can make some folks a bit salty, but is also an easier pill to swallow since Azuma is an older ship. I mean, in terms of the health of the game, having a new cruiser that's different but still stronger than most of the alternatives out there is much better than having something essentially similar to Agir, but stronger, since then it doesn't really add anything new to the game from a mechanical standpoint, and it also devalues not just Agir, but even more of the game's existing ships via power creep. In fact, I remember that being one of the complaints about Agir when she got buffed just prior to release, and then essentially ended up being a stronger Azuma, as opposed to being someone equal but different. Especially given that we now have more UR ships slated to be released in the year, as opposed to just one UR per year. I think it's good to dial down the OP factor of these ships and not release a bunch of New Jerseys and Shimokazes that could potentially break the game with uncontrolled power creep. Yeah, so Kronshtadt might not be the New Jersey or Shimokaze of heavy cruisers. At the same time, she's not a weak ship either. If Kronstadt's biggest problem is having Agir be stronger while being equal or so to Azuma, and then lording over all the other heavy cruisers, I honestly don't think that's a bad spot for her to be in. Yeah, so what do you think of Kronshtadt? As always, if you have any thoughts or questions, please feel free to share them in the comment section. This is Tabi Asobi, and thank you for watching.